What's up, everybody? Welcome to the first official video or episode of the CCT podcast, where we talk culture, conversations, and trends happening in the Black community. So basically the format for this podcast, each week we'll be coming with a current topic or a trend or something that's happening within the Black community. And there will be your host, which is me, Arlinda, along with a special guest. And these guests will be from different walks of life, different experiences to bring different perspectives to the conversation. This week we have the lovely Elisa. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the people.
I'm Elisa, as she said. I am, all in education. I worked as, a teacher. I'm currently in my master's program in school counseling.
Oh, Black education.
And so I look forward to our little podcast and our different views.
Yes. Well, being that both of us have a background in education, of course, myself, educator. The education, that's my first love. Like, I love to do it, but most of all, like, I'm called to the work to do it. I think we need more Black educators, but that's another conversation. But being true to our love to education, the first topic of the CCT podcast will be the prioritizing of education in the Black community. Are we prioritizing education? Have we stopped prioritizing education? And what impact is that decision having on our community? All right, let's dive right in. Of course, we're talking about prioritizing education. Are we prioritizing education in the Black community? And I think before we can even really dive into a conversation like this, we have to look at, like, what was education like for us growing up? What was education? What was that conversation about education like in your house?
Well, so my mom's an educator. So education was always, basically top priority. I was that kid that the doors open, you were there. She had different, whether it's from her own instruction or asking teachers, like if it was things that I, maybe was a little advanced on. She'd ask the teacher for, extra work or whatever it is. That, like, basically, it was always priority. She also, even though, like, I was, on track as far as developmentally, like, with reading and everything, she had a friend who kind of specialized in, what do you call it? What's the reading?
Reading interventionist?
No, not reading intervention, but basically just helping, like, to promote, like, make
the foundations of reading.
Right. Hooked on phonics. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
So hooked on phonics. So I did that a lot when I was, like, kindergarten, first grade, all that, to make sure, I was basically, like I said, on track. So she took that, like, extra mile for, like, with my reading. So yeah, like I said, so everything was.
So that sounds like engagement too, right? So. I guess basically what I took from that was like your parent or your mom was like really engaged in what was happening to her education. What was that big C conversation though? That college conversation? Because I know for me growing up, like our parents, for me, and my parents had four children. So what I noticed was that, like, the conversation about education was kind of different from child to child. So when it came to me, like the big C conversation, like you need to get through high school, do your best because college is your next step, like college was always at the forefront. Was there an expectation for you to go to college, or, were you kind of left to be able to figure out your own path?
So with both of my parents, I will say I'm very grateful for it. They always kind of like allowed me to find my own way to some degree, to a fault, because I'm very opinionated in my own little world. But yeah, so it was never like a forced thing, like you have to go to college, but it was always encouraged for me to know what I wanted to do. Luckily, I guess I've always kind of known that, like, not necessarily that I wanted to go to college, but I had to go to college because I always knew that I wanted to go into psychology in some way. Or the counseling field in some way. I wasn't exactly sure for a while. But yeah, college was always kind of like a thing.
Right. That's interesting. Because now, let's bring it to now, because like we're 90s kids, like right in that area. So like education for us was like at the forefront. A lot of things that we see now as it pertains to education in school and things like that were not what the culture of it has become for today. So I have a lot of conversations like with a lot of people, maybe in their 19s, 20s now, who are like, well, I don't need to go to college. Like I can advance without college. I'm wondering, what is your view on that now? Like this ideal of, there are different ways for me to obtain success, and education is not necessarily that route that I want to take. Do you think that is a wise position to take, or what are some impacts that you feel like come from that sort of a path?
I'm actually interested to hear your perspective on that first before I give mine. I do have an opinion on it. I want to hear yours.
Well, I'm against it. I'm a huge education person. I think, honestly, in the Black community, to a degree, I feel like we've been conditioned to basic. Like we get the very basics. I want to graduate high school, bam, then I'm just going to jump to the success. And that's not the case. You know, life is definitely more complicated than that. And you definitely need education to get you into doors that basic talent or skill may not be able to walk you through. So I'm big on education. I think we should set that expectation that high school is not your last step. You need to go beyond and look for other avenues, you know, to be educated, because we need to know these things. And I think this is impactful on our community because we lack a lot of the things that education provides. When we look at our lack of lawyers, our lack of teachers, our lack of doctors, I think it's tied in a way to the decision to step away from education. You know, if we look back during the time, like Black people were fighting to go to college. They were fighting to get this education so that they can start to impact and immerse into these fields where, you know, other races had predominantly dominated that. So I feel like when we step away from that education and we start to say, well, I can get it another way, it's kind of being tied to a mindset of just being comfortable and complacent.
Okay, well, so I have a slightly difference in opinion on that. I think that, yes, education is very important. However, I don't think that, a formal education is super necessary in that, like, college, that 4-year university thing. I don't think that that's completely necessary. Well, I know that it's kind of not necessary for, like, some people, because you have people who, and I think that this is also an issue. I understand that, you know, in the Black community, you know, like, education should be important. They need to, you know, advance, like how you were saying, like, you know, lawyers, doctors, and all those things. But what about people who go into, like, whether it's like mechanics or like in all those different trades, plumbers, whatever, these different electricians, all these different things, that's also a necessity. Yes, it's another form of, like, you know, higher education.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was about to say. Right. Like, trade school is school. Right. It's the next step. It's like, it's still education. And I'm not prioritizing those typical, like, career paths, right? I know we always think about lawyers and things like that, but, like, we need engineers, we need plumbers, we need electricians, we need carpenters, you know, so that's still education. Like, that's taking that next step to say, I need some more knowledge, basically, you know, to be able to do my skill or my job to the best of my ability. So I definitely think that that's still, you know, the need for education.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, like, I think that, yeah, like, overall, just education, like, and even with not, like I said, formal learning isn't necessarily, like, a super necessity. But I think that, like, just in life in general, us as humans, learning is a non-stop journey. So whether it's, you know, like I said, formal education or just life in general, like, you have to continue to learn regardless.
I'm wondering, though, if you're looking deeper into the impact on our community right now. So if every high schooler took this mindset of, well, I don't need the formal education, where does that leave the Black community? Where does that really leave us? If everyone is to adapt their mindset of, oh, this is not really necessary, well, where does that leave our communities?
Well, I don't think that, I think, like, realistically, of course, not everybody is going to go into, oh, I don't need to go to college. Because, like, I look at it for, say, like, for my example, when I was in high school, like I said, I've always known that I wanted to go into psychology, like, since I was in, like, late elementary, maybe even a little bit of middle school. I've always known. And so, like, when I was in high school, you know, applying for colleges and, like, you know, getting ready to do ACT. And I remember my school counselor, which is kind of a reason why I wanted to go into school counseling. My school counselor that was technically assigned to me, when she was asking, like, what school were you looking at, what, you know, major, all that stuff. And I told her psychology. And she told me that, like, basically not to do it because it's not a field, like there's not a demand in that field, like I should look into like pharmacy or something. And it was like, I mean, yeah, but that's not what I want to do.
Right.
And so I know like with pharmacy, like all that like STEM stuff. So my point is, when it comes to like the norm of things, like when we look at it like now, in like the last like I'll say like 10 years or so, STEM has been heavily, you know, forced upon kids. Mm-hmm. But me as a person, I was like, no, I'm not trying to do that. Yeah, they may make more money or whatever, but that's not the field that I'm looking into. I have a whole another passion. So it's like with this example that we're talking about, there may be kids who decide, okay, I want to go to a trade school, but you still have other kids who will go to college just because like either that's what their parents want or whatever their field, whatever their desire or motivation is, they'll still go to college.
I guess I'm looking at it from a different perspective because I don't personally feel like education is made a priority in our community. Mm-hmm. And I want to kind of segue us into this. Like we've already spoke about being educators, and we both have kind of had experience working with underprivileged, you know, scholars or children, teaching students who are from, you know, areas that are stricken with poverty. Mm-hmm. And when I look at that and like those experiences, and I want your perspective first, like what are some trends that you saw or you're seeing or experienced? And yeah, just to note, y'all, Elisa is like a up and coming counselor here. She'll be graduating with her master's, right? Mm-hmm. Really soon. So like you've had experience in school, like from multiple perspectives, where I'm in the classroom dealing with the general education, like you're dealing with the social emotional and all those other things. So like what trends are you seeing from students, from parents, from other educators? Like what's happening?
So like academically, I think there's definitely a decline in like with reading. Yeah, like a lot of, whether it's like just the non-desire to read or learn how to read, or just like, you know, like when we were younger, we liked reading. Like we had books all day long. It was like reading books. That was the punishment if we couldn't read books. Whereas kids now, they don't really like to read. And nobody's really, I guess, pushing that for them to read. Whether it's parents, teachers, whatever it is, they're not like pushing kids to learn how to read. It's kind of like, oh, if they don't know how to read, don't call on them or don't, you know, make them do anything. So that's the academic, but like the social emotional side, a lot of kids are, I don't know I have a few like theories, I guess, but a lot of kids are having a lot of issues with like emotional regulation. Even just like socially, like learning how to play with kids and like interact with kids, even adults, like just people in general, like they don't know how to interact with people. And it's like, I don't know if it's a cultural thing. I don't know if it's like, you know, due to like the pandemic and like some kids maybe not going to like daycare and stuff like that. But I think that's definitely a big issue.
Big part of, I think you said something that kind of triggered a little bit for me. You were like, kids don't have the desire to do it. Especially with reading. Like I'm sure every educator right now that's in the field, like doing the hard work, knows the gap in reading right now, especially like how more intense it's become with COVID, like trying to get scholars to learn to read and fill up those reading gaps. So reading is huge right now. But for me, I feel like their lack of desire is an indication of a lack of priority of education in the home. I think a lot of times now parents are unconsciously sabotaging like scholars' education, because when you're not motivated to push them, they don't see the importance for it.
Right.
And ultimately, when we're talking about the impact that has on communities, when you're talking about kids not being able to regulate their emotions. When you talk about kids not being able to interact socially well with other kids, I think this is an impact because we're not prioritizing like teaching them and training them, you know, even beyond, like, before you can prioritize education, there are certain foundations that you have to set as a parent. Like, there has to be certain expectations. So, like, when we went to school, it was, listen, I'm sending you to school to learn, period. Like, I know every black parent, or, you know, we had that conversation of, you don't go to school to play. My dad was huge on that. Every moment in school is like super important. And so what I try to do with my kids is like remind them that, yeah, you may be in second, third, fourth grade now, but everything that you do today determines what tomorrow looks like. But I'm not sure parents are having those type of conversations anymore, especially in our community, right? So look down the line like 10, 20 years from now. What do we see happening in our community because of this lack of prioritizing education?
I really think that we kind of already can see, especially like, okay, COVID was 2020. And honestly, even I know, like, at least here in Mississippi, like I did substitute teaching my first year of grad school. And so I did a lot of, because I like the high school setting. And I saw even then, and that was in 2019. So that was, you know, pre-COVID. So we can't blame everything on COVID. But I think we kind of can see, like, kids are going into high school and they're still not able to read. It's not just like, oh, at elementary and they're like just, you know, like say with behaviors and they're just going to grow out of it. It's like it's getting worse. And I really just think that, like you said, like it's really just not a priority. And I don't know how, like, the significance that made it, because like I said, you had kids who couldn't read, but now it's like it's starting, I guess, earlier. And like we already know from even like when we were younger that you had teachers who just passed kids along, whether it's like 'cause they were problem kids or just because they were about to retire, so it's like it don't matter, and they just pass kids along who don't know how to read, who don't know how to count, who don't know how to count money, whatever it is.
Well, yeah, and then of course as educators, like we've had experience to know, like the kids who are acting up, like we've had kids that every time at 12 o'clock we were like, man, every day at 12 o'clock this kid is off this, you know. And then we kind of was like, what do we do at 12? Oh, we're reading at 12. Oh, we're doing number stories at 12. So we kind of started to see a correlation between their behavior and the things that they could not access academically. But I'm wondering, beyond, like, because I know we're focusing, when you get to talking about reading and the gaps in education, now I want to kind of look at the community. Because if you're saying things like, man, we got kids in high school who cannot read, what happens when the school releases those kids out into the community? Like, how does this issue with reading and this lack of prioritizing education contribute to our jail rate? How does this contribute to the crime rate in our communities? Like, how is this impacting this?
I mean, we already know, as far as like education, you don't have education, you don't have access to certain, you know, career paths. And then we know also here in Mississippi, it's not as many, say, like career or fields or opportunities here as it is in I'll just say Houston or California or whatever it is. So that even more limits the potential, the potential of certain kids. So that's when you start going up on crime, of course, then you're going up in like jail and prison. That's when you start going up in like homicides and different things like that. So it's like a snowball effect of different issues.
Right. You know, all of this is like really heavy stuff that we have to take into consideration, especially, you know, looking at where we come from. And that kind of pushes me to the final point, like moving forward. I think we've kind of established in conversation, like, yeah, we have kind of taken the priority off education. Like, we've kind of been lax in terms of pushing education and motivating our kids to want to be their best. Like, we've kind of adapted some poor habits when it comes to education and like setting goals and expectations. But moving forward, like, what are some things that you see from a counselor and an educator perspective that we can do in the school wise that can positively impact the Black community?
Honestly, I'm thinking that, like, because there's a lot of foundational things that are missing in schools and classrooms, family, whatever. But you say it's just in school. So, but like, there's a lot of foundational things that are missing. So I think that honestly, starting from the basic, kind of getting that understanding of where kids are, not where they should be or where we need them to be.
Good.
Thank you. But yeah, like just kind of getting them, like figuring out where they are, meeting them where they are, so we can get them to grow instead of trying to place them where we think they should be and then helping them grow also. It's like, 'cause that's kind of unrealistic.
Man, that's deep. I know that's not on topic. That's a whole nother conversation of like being realistic with where we are, being able to accept where we are, and then being able to move forward from where we actually are and not putting ourselves where we want to be or like where we fantasize to be at this point, like really being there. So, wow, I think this was a really good conversation. What are your closing remarks? Like, if we could sum up this podcast in 15 seconds.
I think, just making sure, we pour into our children, whether it's people that, we actually have, given, or I say given birth, or kids that's like, whether it's like neighborhood kids, like just other family members, just pour into, the babies.
Yeah. I guess we'll close this podcast by saying that I think when it all boils down, we've established that education is important. Like, we need to put that expectation back on our kids. Number one, letting them know that, like, you're capable, right? I think a lot of our kids kind of struggle, and this is just from what I can observe in the class. Like, I have kids who will sometimes shy away from reading or giving out their answer. The answer is correct, but like they just don't trust in their ability to provide the correct answer, and so they shy away. So definitely setting that expectation on them, supporting them in it. So not just giving them an iPad saying, get on this educational website, but like, if you want them to fall in love with reading, be committed to take time to read with them and read to them. Like, if you want them to be excited about school, show up at their programs. Come to the school, have lunch with them. Be an active presence in your child's school and in their education. And I think when we start to see more of that in our community, in our schools, then it's going to impact the communities. I think we're definitely going to see the dropout rate drop down. We're definitely going to see the incarceration rate begin to decline for African Americans when we start to put that priority back on education. Elisa, I have enjoyed talking. This was a good conversation. It was a good starter conversation. Y'all, we are wrapping up, but we want you to know where you can find us when we are not on the podcast. So go ahead and drop your information, Elisa, where they can find you.
So on Instagram, you can find me at Valentine with 7 E's. That's Valentine. I'm so sorry. _ Valentine with 7 E's at the end.
Say that again, because I got confused.
At little A _ Valentine E.
And definitely you can find me here on YouTube. I'll be getting an Instagram page and all those things really soon, and I'll be dropping that in the next podcast. Until then, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have something to add to the conversation, go ahead and do it below, and we'll get back to you. We'll respond. We want to hear what you think and what you feel about this conversation. Till next time.